It is December 1944. The temperature is 20 degrees below zero. In the frozen forests of Belgium, Adolf Hitler has just sprung the greatest trap of World War II. It is a masterstroke of secrecy and violence. A massive German army, 250,000 strong, has smashed within American lines. Their goal? To split the Allied armies in half and seize the port of Antwerp. It is Hitler's last gamble, and it is working perfectly. In the center of this chaos lies the small town of Bastogne. Trapped inside are the battered paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division. They are completely encircled. They have no winter clothes. They are running out of ammunition, and they are being pounded by German heavy artillery from every single direction. The German commander sends a message demanding surrender. The American response is famous. Nuts! But bravery doesn't stop tank shells. The Germans are tightening the noose. If Bastogne falls, the entire road network opens up for the Nazis, and the war could drag on for years. The paratroopers need a miracle. They need a rescue. But the only rescue force available is miles away, stuck in mud and snow, facing a wall of German steel. Standard military tactics say it is impossible to break through in time. It requires a calm, calculated approach. But one American lieutenant colonel didn't believe in being calm. He believed in violence of action, and he was about to propose a plan so reckless, so tactically stupid, that it was the only thing that could possibly save them. To understand how the trap was broken, you have to look past the maps and meet the man holding the sledgehammer. The situation was desperate. General George S. Patton, a commander known for his ego and his brilliance, had just pulled off a logistical miracle that military historians still study today. In the middle of a blizzard, he turned his entire Third Army 90 degrees. He stopped them from attacking east into Germany and drove them north into flank of the Nazi offensive. It was a maneuver that should have taken weeks. Patton did it in days. But moving an army is one thing. Punching through a wall of German steel is another. Leading the tip of Patton's spear was a legendary 4th Armored Division. These men were Patton's favorites. They were his troubleshooters. They didn't believe in holding ground. They believed in taking it. And at the very front of that division, the absolute tip of the spear, was a 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by a man who would become a legend, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. Abrams wasn't your typical officer. He didn't manage the battle from a safe command 10 miles behind the lines, looking at maps and drinking coffee. Abrams was a warrior. He commanded from the turret of his own personal tank, a modified Sherman he named Thunderbolt. He was a cigar-chomping, blunt-talking tactician who believed that violence of action was the only cure for a stalemate. His philosophy was simple. If you aren't moving, you're dying. By this point in the war, Abrams had already worn out 6 different tanks. He was currently riding in Thunderbolt 7. That tells you everything you need to know about his leadership style. But by December 26th, even Abrams was pushing the limits of human endurance. The 37th Tank Battalion was exhausted. They were running on caffeine, adrenaline, and hatred. They had been fighting nonstop for days, clawing for every inch of snowy ground against a desperate enemy. The conditions were apocalyptic. The temperature had dropped so low that skin would freeze to metal instantly. The tank crews were living inside their steel beasts, sleeping in 15-minute shifts while the engines idled just to keep them from freezing to death. They were just a few miles from Bastogne. They could hear the distant rumble of the siege. But the closer they got, the harder the Germans fought. The Nazis knew the Americans were coming. Hitler had ordered his commanders to hold the ring around Bastogne at all costs. And standing directly between Abrams and the trapped 101st Airborne was a tiny, unassuming village of Assenois. On a map, Assenois looked like nothing, just a cluster of farmhouses and a church. But in reality, it was a fortress. The village sat on a ridge that dominated the road. To get to Bastogne, the tanks had to go through Assenois. There was no way around it. The Germans had turned the village into a kill zone. It was swarming with elite troops, elements of the German 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and hardened Fallschirmjäger paratroopers. They had camouflaged anti-tank guns pointing down every approach. They had mined the shoulders of the road. They had infantry hiding in the cellars with Panzerfaust, rocket launchers capable of blowing a Sherman turret sky high. The terrain itself was a nightmare. It was dense woods and narrow, sunken roads. It was terrain that funneled tanks into a single line, making them easy targets. If the lead tank was hit, the whole column would be trapped, unable to move forward or backward. Abrams pulled his column to a halt and assessed the situation. He looked at the village. He looked at the terrain. According to the U.S. Army military rulebook, this was a textbook deliberate attack situation. The manual was very clear on what you do here. Step 1, you stop the tanks. Step 2, you bring up your own infantry regiments to protect the armor. Step 3, you call in massive artillery barges to soften the target for hours, turning the village to rubble. Step 4, you slowly flank the enemy, cutting off their retreat. Step 5, you send the infantry in first to methodically clear the town, house by house, room by room, ensuring no anti-tank weapons remain. That is the smart way. That is the safe way to preserve your men and your machines. A deliberate attack minimizes risk. But there was one problem. Time. Abrams looked at his watch. It was late afternoon. The sun was already starting to dip toward the horizon. Inside the burning perimeter of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne was dying. They were out of medical supplies. They were counting their remaining bullets. If Abrams took the time to do things by the book, if he waited for the infantry, if he waited for the artillery prep, it would take all night. By the time they cleared Assenois the smart way, Bastogne might have already fallen. He realized that in the specific moment, being smart was actually a death sentence of men inside the trap. Abrams chewed on his cigar. He keyed his radio. He knew that what he was about to propose went against every lesson taught at West Point. He was about to throw the rule book out the turret hatch. He wasn't going to wait. He wasn't going to be careful. He was going to do the one thing the Germans didn't expect. He was going to do the stupidest thing possible. At exactly 4:50 p.m., the world ended for the German defenders of Assenois. Abrams had coordinated the attack down to the second. There was no warning shot, no slow buildup. One moment. The village was quiet, settling into the freezing winter twilight. The next, the sky ripped open. Battery after battery of American heavy artillery opened fire simultaneously. The barrage was concentrated into a tiny box, right on the edge of the village. It was a walking barrage designed to creep forward just yards ahead of the American tanks. The ground shook so violently that snow fell from the trees miles away. But before the smoke could even begin to clear, the second part of Abrams' stupid plan arrived. For 47 thunderbolts, the angels on the shoulders of the 4th Armored dove out of the clouds. They came in so low that the pilots could see the terror on the faces of the German soldiers. They weren't dropping precision strikes. They were dropping everything they had right into the main street. They strafed the road with .50 caliber machine guns and dropped 500-pound bombs dangerously close to the American line. It was a risk of friendly fire that would make most commanders vomit, but it was necessary. As the last bomb detonated, throwing dirt and cobblestones hundreds of feet into the air, the engines of the 37th Tank Battalion roared. They didn't advance carefully. They didn't check for mines. They charged like a runaway freight train. The Germans in Assenois were hardened veterans. They had fought in Russia. They had fought in France. They knew how tank battles worked. You wait for the shelling to stop, you wait for the infantry to appear, and then you open fire. They were waiting for a tactical advance. They didn't expect a stampede of steel. Abrams' tanks hit the edge of the village at full speed. It was absolute, unmitigated chaos. The dust and smoke in the artillery were so thick that the tank drivers were effectively driving blind. They couldn't see the road. They could only see the vague shapes of burning buildings. The noise was deafening. A mix of roaring engines, clanking treads, and the continuous thump-thump-thump of machine gun fire. Inside the village, the German defense fell apart. Soldiers who had been hiding in cellars and foxholes scrambled out, stunned by the audacity of the assault. They tried to set up their anti-tank weapons, but the Americans were already on top of them. Leading the charge was a Sherman tank commanded by Lieutenant Charles Bulge. Bulge knew that being the first tank in the column was usually a death sentence. He was a canary in the coal mine, but he didn't flinch. He stood in the turret, exposed to the freezing air and enemy fire, manning the .50 caliber machine gun. Following Abrams' strict orders, Bogus didn't stop to aim at specific soldiers. He used a technique called recon by fire. He simply held the trigger down, spraying heavy rounds into every window, every doorway, and every shadow that looked suspicious. His tank took hits. Small arms fire pinged off the hull like hail. A mine exploded near his tracks, rocking the 30-ton beast, but the momentum carried him forward. Behind him, the rest of the column followed suit. They were driving so fast and so close together that there was no room for the Germans to react. German infantrymen, realizing too late that the tanks weren't stopping, were caught in the open. Some were gunned down. Others were crushed under the treads as the Sherman smashed through barricades and debris. A German 88mm anti-tank gun, a weapon that could slice through a Sherman like butter, was spotted by the column. In a normal engagement, this would halt the attack. But the American gunners didn't stop. They fired while moving, pumping high-explosive shells into the gun crew before they could even swivel their weapon. The sheer violence of the speed was the weapon. A Panzerfaust team in a basement window hesitated for just a second, shocked by the speed of the tanks. And that second cost them their lives as a Sherman blasted the building. While driving past it at 30 miles per hour, they blasted through the village in minutes. It was a blur of fire and snow. They left a trail of destruction, burning half-tracks and confused, terrified German defenders behind them. Abrams had broken every rule of armored warfare. He had separated his tanks from his infantry. He had attacked without proper reconnaissance. He had driven blind into a fortified town. But because he broke the rules, the German defense didn't just bend. It collapsed. The perfect trap that Hitler had set around Bastogne had been punctured by a blunt instrument moving at maximum velocity. The road was open. Lieutenant Charles Bogus's tank, a Sherman named Cobra King, burst out the other side of the burning village like a cork popping from a bottle. Suddenly, the claustrophobic nightmare of the narrow streets was gone. The deafening roar of the close-quarters battle faded behind them, replaced by the mechanical whine of the tank's engine and the crunch of snow under the treads. The road ahead was wide open, but this was the most dangerous moment of all. It was now late twilight. The winter sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the Ardennes forest in a wash of grays and deep blues. Visibility was dropping by the second. Bogus stood in his turret, eyes straining against the wind, scanning the tree line. He knew the geography. He knew that somewhere in front of him lay the perimeter of the 101st Airborne. But he also knew a terrifying fact. The 101st had no tanks. That meant that to the nervous, trigger-happy paratroopers hiding in the woods, any tank, whether it had a White Star or a Black Cross, looked like the enemy. Bogus was driving a 30-ton target straight at men who had been surrounded for days, men who were running on no sleep, and whose only standing order was to kill anything that approached their lines. 300 yards ahead, they saw them, dark. Jagged shapes broke the smooth white surface of the snow. Foxholes, a line of them, dug deep into the frozen earth near a pillbox. Bogus keyed his radio, his voice cracking with tension. Hold fire. I repeat, hold fire. His gunner had the turret traversed, his finger hovering over the trigger of the 75mm cannon. If those were Germans, the Sherman was exposed and vulnerable. A single Panzerfaust shot from that distance wouldn't miss. Every instinct screamed at them to shoot first and ask questions later. That's how you survive the war. But Bogus waited. He ordered his driver to keep moving, but slowly. He stood tall in the turret, exposing himself completely, hoping that his silhouette would look American. He was gambling his life and the lives of his crew on a hunch. The tank rolled closer. 50 yards. 40 yards. The foxholes remained silent. No muzzle flashes. No shouting. Just the eerie stillness of the winter woods. Then movement. A single figure rose slowly from a foxhole. He didn't raise a rifle. He didn't run. He just stood there, a lonely shape against the snow, watching the metal monster approach. Bogus shouted out, "Identify!" The figure took a step forward. Even in the gloom, Bogus could see the distinctive shape of the helmet. It wasn't the flared coal scuttle helmet of the Wehrmacht. It was the round M1 steel pot of the U.S. Army. And on the sleeve, barely visible, was a screaming eagle patch. It was an engineer from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. Bogus signaled the driver stop. The tracks ground to a halt. The engine idled, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the forest floor. At exactly 4:55 p.m., on December 26, 1944, the tip of Patton's spear finally touched the shield of Bastogne. Lieutenant Bogus climbed out of the turret. His boots hit the snow. He was covered in soot, grease, and the grime of 3 days of nonstop combat. He walked toward the foxhole. The paratrooper, Second Lieutenant Webster, climbed out to meet him. There was no ceremony. There was no brass band playing. Just two exhausted men meeting in a frozen field in Belgium. Webster extended a gloved hand. Bogus took it. The paratrooper looked at the tank, then back at Bogus, shaking his head in disbelief. He grinned a cracked, weary smile, and reportedly said the words that would go down in history. "I thought you guys would never get here." Bogus smiled back. "We're here now." The news traveled down the line like an electric shock. Radios crackled to life. "They're here. The 4th Armored is here. The road is open. The siege was broken." Abrams' stupid idea, his reckless, suicidal charge to the heart of Assenois, had worked. He had forced open a corridor barely wider than the road itself. Within the hour, the sound of battle was replaced by the sound of salvation. The darkness was pierced by the headlights of trucks. A convoy of ambulances raced into the corridor, ready to evacuate the hundreds of wounded men who had been trapped in the cellars of Bastogne, slowly dying for lack of care. Behind them came the ammo trucks and the food trucks. The 101st Airborne had held the line, but it was Creighton Abrams and the 37th Tank Battalion who had shattered the lock. The trap that Hitler believed was unbreakable had been smashed to pieces by a colonel who simply refused to stop driving. As the sun fully set on December 26, the guns around Assenois finally fell silent. The relief of Bastogne was official. Adolf Hitler's perfect trap had failed. And it is important to understand why it failed. On paper, Hitler held all the cards. He had gathered the last great reserves of the German army, Panzer divisions, paratroopers, and SS shock troops. He had counted on the weather, launching the attack during a blizzard that grounded the overwhelming Allied air power. He had counted on the element of surprise, catching the Americans sleeping in what was supposed to be a quiet sector. But most of all, he had counted on the Allies playing by the rules. The German High Command had studied American military doctrine extensively. They knew that American commanders were trained to be methodical. They knew Americans relied on heavy logistics, massive artillery preparation, and risk-averse tactics. The Germans built their defenses at Assenois specifically to counter a smart commander. They set up a defense that would chew up a slow, deliberate advance. Hitler didn't count on a colonel who was willing to do the stupid thing. He didn't count on a man like Creighton Abrams. If Abrams had followed the textbook, if he had waited for the infantry, if he had stopped to clear the mines, if he had acted rationally, the German reinforcements would have arrived. The trap would have snapped shut permanently, and the 101st Airborne would likely have been forced to surrender. History would look very different today. Creighton Abrams proved that sometimes, in the heat of battle, the textbook is wrong. He demonstrated a terrifying truth about warfare. Speed is a weapon. We often think of weapons as guns, bombs, and tanks. But time is the most critical resource on the battlefield. By moving faster than the enemy could think, by moving faster than the enemy could react, Abrams paralyzed them. The Germans at Assenois weren't defeated by superior numbers. They were defeated by superior momentum. They were psychologically broken by the sheer audacity of commander who refused to tap the brakes. Abrams showed that sometimes calculation leads to paralysis. When the situation is dire, overthinking is a death sentence. The only solution is sheer, unadulterated violence of action. This philosophy didn't end in the snow of Belgium. Creighton Abrams would survive the war, having worn out tank after tank, always fighting from the front. He would go on to become a 4-star general. He commanded all U.S. forces in Vietnam during the deepest struggles of that war. Eventually, he rose to become the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, the highest-ranking officer in the branch. He spent his life reshaping the military, embedding that spirit of aggressive leadership into the DNA of the force. And today, his legacy is made of steel. If you look at the United States military today, the backbone of its ground power is the M1 Abrams main battle tank. It is not a coincidence that this machine bears his name. The M1 Abrams is a 60-ton beast powered by a jet turbine engine. It is designed to be faster, louder, and more aggressive than anything else on the battlefield. It is a tank designed to close the distance, to shoot while moving, and to smash through enemy lines before they know what hit them. It doesn't just carry his name, it carries his soul. Every time an M1 Abrams roars across a desert or a plain, it is paying tribute to that freezing afternoon in 1944. It is a tribute to the cigar-chomping colonel who looked at a village swarming with Nazis, looked at a map that said impossible, and decided to hit the gas pedal. The siege of Bastogne teaches us a lesson that applies to more than just war. It teaches us that when life traps you, when the odds are stacked against you, and when the enemy is closing in, you don't try to pick the lock. You don't ask for permission. You lower your shoulder, you throttle up, and you smash the trap to pieces. If you enjoyed this story of grit, armor, and the man who refused to stop, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We have countless more untold stories from the battlefield waiting for you. Stories of the heroes, the villains, and the moments that change history. Leave a comment below. Was Abrams brave or just lucky? I'll see you in the next one.